Throughout my last several videos, I have received numerous comments requesting an in-depth video on an ultralight slip float rig. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now I'm sitting in the office right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by sharing what you need, then I'm going to show you how to rig it up, and then we're going to take this video to the lake, and we are going to be fishing with one of these things and catching some fish. Now while I'm fishing, I'm going to be sharing with you what I like to use it for, how I like to fish it, so on and so forth. So by the end of this video, the goal is for you to not only know how to tie one up, but also know how to fish one so you can bring it to your local body of water and catch a whole pile of fish. So without further ado, let's talk about what you need. There are a few essential pieces of equipment that you need for a slip float rig. The first is a bobber stop. This is what allows your slip float rig to set to a desired depth so you can target fish anywhere from 4 foot of water all the way down to 30 foot of water. After your bobber stop, the next thing you obviously need is some form of slip float. Now in this case, because I'm fishing with ultralight gear, I like to use the Mule peg float because it's extremely lightweight. The next two things are technically optional, but I always like to rig up a swivel and some split shot weights because I think that it makes my rig just stand up a little bit better, and I feel like it runs just a little bit more true underwater. Finally, when it comes to the business end of this presentation, you're going to want some kind of jig or hook. Now for me, I always like to use a jig in plastic because that's kind of my style. That being said, you can definitely use a hook with live bait, or you could use a hair jig. There's really no right or wrong. It's mostly what's going to give you the most confidence on the water. So after you've got all of the equipment necessary, the last thing you're obviously going to need is some form of rod and reel. Now in this case, I've got my 7'6" Phoenix Elixir. I've got a size 1000 Daiwa Tatula here. You know, it doesn't necessarily matter what setup you use. You can use this on a heavy setup all the way down to an ultralight setup. Today we're focused on ultralight. But the one thing that I will say is I do technically prefer a little bit longer rod. So if you have a little bit longer rod, it tends to work just a little bit better to move more line. The thing about this rig is you might end up having that bait set 20 feet down. And so if you get a bite and you've got a lot of line out there, that longer rod allows you to set the hook and move more line. And I find that that makes a pretty big difference with regards to hooking and landing more fish. So that is the one thing I will say. Other than that though, you can pretty much fish this on any piece of equipment. I've currently got a spoon rigged up on this rod, so I'm going to cut that off, and then we're going to go ahead and rig up a slip float rig. Now a slip float rig is not exactly hard to rig up, but it requires a couple of steps, so I figure I better show you. Let's get started. You guys already know I love these Castmasters, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this puppy off. That's a nice looking color though, I'm not going to lie. So I always use these Thill Premium bobber stops. They work quite well. They're cost efficient. I will say that they tend to slip after a couple of uses, but for the most part, they do a pretty good job. These dang beads are always running away from me. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in my pocket. The first step is you take your tag end and then you just go through this little tube. And then once you go through the tube, you can bring this thing all the way up to where you plan to set it at. Or you can just bring it up there a little bit. Then all you have to do is just take your finger and just push that bobber stop right off of that tube. And then you just kind of hold on to it and just take that tube off the line. You can just trash that. You do not need the tube anymore. Now the next step is just get this bobber stop set on the location that you plan to fish it. So if you're going to fish your jig down to 10 foot of water, you want to bring this all the way up your line 10 feet and then cinch it down. Before I cinch this down, I am going to moisten it a little bit, so I like to just run it through my mouth real quick just to get it a little bit wet. Then you just got to cinch it down. Really simple. And I'm not going to cinch it down super tight right now, but I will say, because these tend to slip, I think it's pretty important to cinch them down relatively tight. You don't want it so tight that you can't adjust it on the water, because the purpose of this rig is the ability to quickly adjust and target the exact depth that you want. So you kind of have to try to find that happy medium of tight, but not too tight. Now I don't technically have this in the right position yet, so I'm not going to snip the tag ends yet, but if you were to have it set up, you can go ahead and snip the tag ends once it's set up in the location you want it. Now these beads are really feisty, as I mentioned. I'm constantly losing them. They're really small. They're kind of hard to get the line through, but once you get it on there, it is important. It serves an important role. This basically prevents your slip float from running up over the top of your bobber stop. So we threaded that on there, and now we can do the same thing with our slip float. So now you can see that the slip float and the bead are on there. They can swing freely until they get to that bobber stop. Once they hit that bobber stop, they can't go any further, and that is what this rig is all about. Now, like I said, a swivel is totally optional, but I do like a swivel, so I'm going to go ahead and tie on a swivel. It's already got some leader line on it, And the reason I like that is I just have more confidence in it. I feel like it reduces line twists, and I feel like my jig hangs more freely. It doesn't spin around too much, and I feel like that's really important. Okay, my swivel is on there, and now an important part. Now I'm using really, really light line here, so it's hard to see. So I'm gonna grab some other line just to show you, but I'm gonna tie the same knot when it comes to my jig. Let me grab some braids so you can see what I'm doing. Solely for demonstration purposes, I am using 30-pound braided fishing line just to showcase what knot I am about to tie onto my 4-pound test. This is called a loop knot. Now I have to be honest with you, tying this knot with a camera right in front of my face is really hard. It's not actually that hard of a knot, but it does require a little bit of concentration, we'll say. This camera is really distracting. Hence the name loop knot. The first thing you're gonna do is form a loop. Next, you're gonna take that tag end and go back through the loop, and you can just kind of cinch that down a little bit. Cinch it down. Now that loop is pretty small, and I like to keep that in between my thumb and my forefinger, and then I just go ahead and feed my tag end through my line tie. And so there you go. You've got a loop, and you've got that line through your line tie. The next thing that I do is I actually pinch the loop in my jig with one finger, and then I take my other finger and I grab that line, and this is where all you have to do is actually wrap it back over the main line a couple times. I usually do either 4 or 5. In this case, whatever, it doesn't really matter. And then lastly, you're just gonna take that tag and you're gonna feed it right back through that loop. There you go. You can see that that tag end, it's looped over this, and then I fed it back through the loop from the start. And before I start to cinch that down, I'm just gonna start to slowly snug it. And I'm actually gonna then take my line, and this is important, I then take that tag end and I feed it back through that upper loop. And that's actually helpful because now the tag end is going to be facing up as opposed to down. In this case, the camera's kind of in my way, so I'm probably not going to end up with the proper loop, but you will get the picture when it's all said and done. So I'm going to just kind of pull on that, and then I'm going to pull my main line. I'm going to pull on that, pull my main line, and I'm just going to snug that down. And then you can kind of push it down. Now in this case, because I've got this camera right in front of my face, I ended up with a pretty big loop. And there you have it. That's a loop knot. Now, again, that loop is a little bit larger than what I would actually like, but the reason that the loop knot is helpful is because it allows that jig to sit completely horizontal. If you tie a polymer knot or just a normal fisherman's knot or whatever, that hook could potentially be a little bit disoriented, and it's going to look a little bit less natural to the fish, and it may actually cost you a couple of bites. As I mentioned, split shot is technically optional as well, but I do like to add a little bit of split shot usually just to kind of give it a little bit more weight. Makes it cast a little easier, but it also makes that float stand up a little bit better. Well, hopefully by this point in the video, you now know what a slip float rig is made up of and how to rig it. If you have any questions though, drop them in the comments below and I will help you as best I can. That being said, this video will not be complete until I catch some fish. And although I don't have time today, I will have time soon. So let's take it from the office to the lake and let's go catch some fish. Well, unfortunately, it's quite a bit windier than I was hoping it would be today, so I can't take out my kayak, but I do have a chance to fish from bank a little bit. And I gotta be honest with you, wind is not exactly a great thing for this rig. Typically, I like to throw this rig in a lot more still conditions, but for the sake of the demonstration, we're gonna go ahead and run it anyways, and we'll see what happens. The major problem with the wind is, number one, it pushes your float around a lot, but it also grabs that line and it pushes it around. And so what happens is that bait's moving a lot faster than you would want. Now, one way to kind of help with that would be to use a little bit heavier weight, but for the most part, I would say this rig is just not that great in super windy conditions. I think I'm probably fishing anywhere from about 6 to 8 foot of water, so I'm gonna set this thing right around 6 foot, and I'm gonna try to keep it relatively close to the bottom because I think perch and largemouth bass are gonna be my primary species that I can catch today. As far as the physical presentation of this rig goes, I'm not going to tell you it's the most exciting thing in the world. Really, I just cast it out there and I let it sit as much as I possibly can. And the colder the water, the more you want to let it sit. Now, it's actually beautiful out today, but the water temperature is still low, so I definitely want to be patient. Every now and again, I like to just make sure that it's kind of looks alive down there, so I'll twitch it a little bit. But generally speaking, less is more, especially the colder the water. There's a bite. Got him. There we go. That's a nice one. Nice yellow perch. There you go. Well, we're on the board, and that's a perfect hook set right there. And you know, that bite was actually not easy to detect. The float just jumped a little bit, and I watched it, and it kind of got pulled under just slightly, so I set the hook. And that's where that long rod definitely paid off a little bit, because that fish, you know, I was able to move the line and get a good hook in him. There's a bite. He hit it. One hit it. He knocked the crap out of it. And then he just totally let go. That's annoying. That's the first bite I've had in quite some time. It was a good cast. That's right back where he was. There he is. He came back for it. It's got to be another perch, the way he's fighting. All right. He's actually... Wait. It's a big old bluegill. That's what's up. How about that? I wasn't expecting a bluegill today. I very rarely catch bluegill out here when it's cold. I catch them in the summer. But that is a nice, pleasant surprise right there. And I'll tell you what, I guarantee that's the same fish that just hit it. Because he hit it real hard, and he didn't hold on. And then I cast it back out there, and he came back. Love to see it. See you, buddy. Well, I tell you what, I was only able to catch 2 fish on the slip float rig today, which is absolutely bonkers. I thought for sure I'd catch at least 3, but I'm just running out of time, unfortunately, and the fish just did not want to cooperate today. Now, I really don't blame the fish, I really blame the conditions. The wind is just not ideal for this rig. I would have definitely been better off with a drop shot, a straight jig, or a spoon, but I was stubborn and I wanted to make this work. But the good news is I've caught a lot of fish on the slip float rig in the past, so if you want to see more slip float rig action, look in the description below. I've got several videos I'm going to link where you can see this rig in action. I think the 3 things that I want you to walk away with is, number 1, not really a great rig for super windy conditions, so definitely I would fish it when it's relatively calm out. Number 2, make sure to experiment with depth. You know, fish shallow, fish deep, and try to target numerous depths while you're out there on the water. Sometimes those fish are going to be 5 feet under the water surface, sometimes those fish are going to be 10 feet under the water surface, and so on and so forth. And if you're not experimenting, you're not going to catch as many fish. And then the third thing is fish slow. The colder the water, the slower you should fish. If it starts to warm up and they start to be a little bit more aggressive, you can start twitching a little bit more. But for the most part, you definitely want to fish slow. I wasn't planning on doing this, but given the annoying conditions, I should at least try. That's so annoying. Literally my second cast. I knew this was gonna happen. My friends, if I'm gonna give you last lesson from today's video, fish the conditions. Don't be stubborn like me and try to make something work that is not right for the conditions. I made 2 casts with this Castmaster, and it's just so much better for this windy conditions. There you go, my second perch of the day. Didn't take very long with the old Castmaster. See you, buddy.